The sound of a gunshot tore through the dusty air of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, in the summer of 1876, but Zadie Thomas didn't flinch. She'd grown accustomed to the sudden violence that punctuated life in this frontier town, where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card, and where a man's reputation hung by the slimmest thread. She stood tall on the wooden boardwalk, her honey-colored hair pinned beneath a modest hat, eyes fixed on the saloon doors that had just swung open to reveal the commotion inside. That cardsharp's been caught red-handed again. Someone shouted as a crowd began to gather. Zadie's heart quickened. There was only one man they could be talking about. Inside the Golden Nugget saloon, Maxwell Stone stood with his hands raised slightly, palms forward in a gesture of peace. The table before him was scattered with playing cards and chips, and across from him sat a red-faced cattle baron named Harrington who was pointing a smoking Colt revolver at the ceiling. "I'm telling you, Stone, you're dealing from the bottom. No man wins 4 hands in a row without some trickery." Harrington bellowed, his face flushed with whiskey and anger. Maxwell remained calm, his deep blue eyes never wavering. "Mr. Harrington, I assure you I play a fair game. Perhaps luck simply favors me tonight." At 32, Maxwell had spent over a decade earning his living at card tables across the Western Territories. Tall and lean, with dark hair that fell just above his collar and a neatly trimmed mustache, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that some mistook for arrogance. His hands, with long, nimble fingers, were his livelihood hands that could shuffle a deck with mesmerizing grace or draw a hidden derringer with lightning speed if necessary. "Luck, that's what you call it," Harrington spat. "Check his sleeves, check his pockets," he demanded of the onlookers. Sheriff Bailey pushed through the crowd, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl beneath his gray mustache. "What's all this ruckus about, gentlemen? Sheriff, this man is cheating honest folk out of their hard-earned money," Harrington accused, jabbing his finger toward Maxwell. Maxwell sighed, accustomed to such accusations. "Sheriff, I've broken no laws. Mr. Harrington is simply disappointed with his fortunes tonight." The sheriff looked between the two men, then at the crowd that had gathered. "Stone, I think it might be best if you called it a night. Tensions are running a bit high." Maxwell nodded gracefully, collecting his winnings with unhurried movements. As he stood to leave, Harrington's meaty hand grabbed his arm. "This isn't over, Stone. This town's getting mighty tired of your tricks." Maxwell gently removed the man's hand from his sleeve. "Good evening to you too, Mr. Harrington." As he walked toward the door, the whispers followed him like shadows. "They say he can mark a card faster than you can blink. I heard he's got cards hidden all over his person. That man hasn't played an honest game in his life." The accusations were familiar companions to Maxwell Stone. In a land where a man's word was supposed to be his bond, being called a cheat was a stain that never quite washed away. But he held his head high as he pushed through the batwing doors into the evening air. And there stood Zadie Thomas. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the saloon, the whispers, the accusations, all of it faded away. Zadie had arrived in Redemption Creek just 3 months prior to take over her late aunt's millinery shop. At 26, she was considered by many to be firmly on the path to spinsterhood, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that Maxwell had noticed from the first moment she'd arrived in town. "Miss Thomas," he said, tipping his hat, "a pleasure to see you out this evening." "Mr. Stone," she replied with a slight nod. "I was just on my way home from delivering a hat to Mrs. Peterson when I heard the commotion." Maxwell gestured toward the street. "May I walk with you? It seems my entertainment for the evening has been cut short." She hesitated, glancing back at the saloon where faces were pressed against the windows, watching them. Everyone in town knew Maxwell Stone's reputation, and most respectable women wouldn't be caught associating with him. "I wouldn't want to damage your reputation, Miss Thomas," he said softly, reading her thoughts. Something shifted in her amber eyes, a flash of defiance, perhaps. "I'm quite capable of deciding whose company I wish to keep, Mr. Stone, and I would welcome your escort." They walked side by side down the main street of Redemption Creek, past the general store where old Mr. Wilkins was closing up for the night, past the blacksmith shop where the forge had cooled hours ago. "They're saying you cheated again," Zadie said finally, her voice neither accusatory nor judgmental, simply stating a fact. Maxwell smiled slightly. "They usually do when they lose. And did you? Cheat, that is." The directness of her question surprised him. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, the light from a nearby window illuminating half his face while leaving the other in shadow. "Miss Thomas, in my line of work, a reputation is both a blessing and a curse. The mystery keeps them coming back to the table, hoping to catch me, hoping to learn my secrets." "That's not an answer, Mr. Stone." "No, it isn't." He offered his arm again, and after a moment she took it. "But I'll tell you something I've never told another soul in this town. I've never needed to cheat. Not once." Zadie studied his face, searching for deception. "Then why let them believe it? A man who's feared or respected at the card table lives longer than one who isn't." He smiled, the expression warming his eyes. "Besides, I find that most people will believe what they want to believe, regardless of the truth." They reached the small cottage that housed both Zadie's millinery shop and her living quarters. A modest porch with a swing faced the street, and pots of geraniums added spots of color in the fading light. "Thank you for your company, Mr. Stone," she said, removing her hand from his arm. "The pleasure was mine, Miss Thomas." He tipped his hat again, then paused. "May I call on you properly sometime? Perhaps Sunday after church?" Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You attend church, Mr. Stone?" A gentle laugh escaped him. "Not regularly, I admit, but I might be persuaded to make an appearance if I knew you'd be there." A blush colored her cheeks. "People will talk. People always talk. It's what they do best in small towns." His voice softened. "But I find myself not caring much about their opinions when I'm in your company." She considered him for a long moment. "Sunday, then." "But I can't promise Reverend Phillips won't use your presence as inspiration for a sermon on reformed sinners." Maxwell grinned. "I'll consider it free entertainment." He took a step back. "Good night, Miss Thomas." "Good night, Mr. Stone." As Maxwell walked back toward the boarding house where he kept a room, he found himself smiling. Zadie Thomas was unlike any woman he'd met in his travels. There was a straightforwardness about her that was refreshing in a world where everyone seemed to be playing their own version of poker, keeping their true thoughts and feelings hidden behind carefully constructed masks. Little did he know that this encounter was the beginning of a story that would eventually set the whole town talking, a story about cards and cheating, about truth and lies, and about a love that would defy all expectations. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm over Redemption Creek. Zadie sat in her usual pew at the small white church, her new lavender dress carefully pressed, and her matching hat adorned with silk violets perched atop her head. She tried to focus on Reverend Phillips' sermon about the prodigal son, but her eyes kept drifting to the door, wondering if Maxwell Stone would actually appear. Just as the Reverend reached the part about the fatted calf, the church door opened, and Maxwell slipped inside. Dressed in a dark suit that looked freshly brushed, with his hair neatly combed and his mustache trimmed, he stood hesitantly at the back. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the congregation, and Reverend Phillips stumbled over his words before regaining his composure. Maxwell's eyes scanned the pews until they found Zadie. With a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement, he took a seat in the last row, directly behind old Widow Jenkins, who clutched her Bible a little tighter to her chest. After the service, as people gathered on the church steps to exchange greetings and gossip, Maxwell made his way toward Zadie, seemingly oblivious to the stares and murmurs that followed him. "Miss Thomas," he said with a slight bow, "that's a lovely hat you're wearing." "Your own creation, I presume." "It is," she replied, fighting a smile. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I'm a man of my word," he said simply. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife and one of Redemption Creek's most influential residents, approached them with a tight smile. "Miss Thomas, how lovely to see you, and Mr. Stone, what a surprise to see you in church today." Maxwell offered her his most charming smile. "Mrs. Peterson, the surprise is all mine. I don't believe I've had the pleasure of seeing you at the card tables." The woman's face reddened. "I certainly should hope not. Mr. Peterson would never approve of such activities." "Pity," Maxwell replied smoothly. "He might learn something about calculated risks before Mrs. Peterson could respond. Zadie quickly interjected. "Mr. Stone was just offering to escort me to dinner at the hotel restaurant. If you'll excuse us, Mrs. Peterson." She practically pulled Maxwell away from the churchyard, feeling the weight of dozens of stares on her back. "You shouldn't antagonize Mrs. Peterson," she scolded once they were out of earshot. "Her husband owns the bank." Maxwell chuckled. "And I own the better part of his gambling debts, though he'd never admit it publicly." He offered her his arm. "Was that just a convenient excuse, or would you actually like to have dinner with me?" Zadie hesitated only briefly before taking his arm. "I suppose I could eat." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Redemption Creek, which wasn't saying much. The tablecloths were clean if somewhat faded, and the menu consisted mainly of steak, potatoes, and whatever vegetables had survived the journey from more fertile lands. But it was the only place in town where a respectable woman could dine out, and Zadie rarely had the occasion to do so. As the waiter seated them at a corner table, Zadie was acutely aware of the other diners watching them. Maxwell, however, seemed perfectly at ease, as if dining with the town milliner after church was something he did every Sunday. "You don't seem bothered by all the attention," she observed as he studied the menu. He glanced up, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've been the subject of speculation for most of my adult life, Miss Thomas. One grows accustomed to it." "Why cards?" she asked suddenly. "Of all the professions a man could choose, why one that invites such suspicion?" Maxwell set the menu aside and leaned forward slightly. "It chose me, in a manner of speaking. I discovered at a young age that I had a gift for numbers, for calculating odds, for reading people's intentions in the flicker of an eyelash or the twitch of a finger. My father was a mathematics professor back east before he died of tuberculosis when I was 14. He taught me that life itself is a series of probabilities and risks. And your mother," a shadow crossed his features. "She remarried within a year to a man who had little use for another man's son. I left home at 16 with my father's pocket watch and a deck of cards. The cards have fed and clothed me ever since." Zadie found herself touched by the matter-of-fact way he described what must have been a painful part of his life. "I'm sorry about your father." Maxwell shrugged. "It was a long time ago, and what brought you to Redemption Creek?" "Surely not the thriving millinery business." She smiled sadly. "My Aunt Martha. She raised me after my parents died in a fire when I was 10. When she passed this winter, she left me the shop. I was working as a seamstress in Denver, barely making ends meet, so I came here to start fresh. And do you like it here? This town doesn't seem particularly welcoming to newcomers. Zadie considered the question carefully. The women need hats. The men need someone to gossip about. I fulfill both needs admirably. Her smile turned genuine. But yes, I do like it here. There's something honest about frontier towns. Everyone shows their true colors eventually. Even cardsharp Miss Thomas. Maxwell's eyes held a challenge. Especially cardsharp's Mr. Stone, she replied, holding his gaze. Their dinner conversation flowed easily after that, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and the peculiarities of Redemption Creek's residents. Zadie found herself laughing more than she had in months, and Maxwell revealed himself to be surprisingly well-educated and thoughtful. As they walked back toward her shop in the fading light, Maxwell asked, "May I call on you again, Miss Thomas? Perhaps without the church service as a prelude." Zadie stopped at her gate and turned to face him. "Mr. Stone, I've enjoyed your company today, but I feel I should be honest with you. I'm not naive about how this town works. Associating with me won't improve your reputation, but associating with you could very well damage mine." "And does that concern you?" "It should," she admitted. "A milliner relies on the goodwill of the women in town." Maxwell nodded, his expression serious. "I understand. Thank you for a lovely afternoon." He turned to leave. "Mr. Stone," she called after him. When he looked back, she continued, "I said it should concern me. I didn't say that it did." A slow smile spread across his face. "Tuesday evening, then. I hear there's a traveling magic show passing through." "Tuesday," she agreed, returning his smile. "I do enjoy a good illusion." As Zadie watched him walk away, she knew she was playing a dangerous game. Maxwell Stone was exactly the kind of man her aunt had warned her about: charming, mysterious, and surrounded by rumors. But there was something about him that intrigued her, something that made her wonder if the stories people told about him were merely convenient fictions that served others' purposes. What she didn't know was that Maxwell Stone had enemies in Redemption Creek, enemies who wouldn't take kindly to his growing closeness with one of the few respectable women in town. And some of those enemies were willing to go to great lengths to ensure that Maxwell Stone's luck finally ran out. The next few weeks saw Zadie and Maxwell spending increasing amounts of time together. They attended the magic show, where Maxwell whispered explanations of the tricks that left Zadie both impressed by his knowledge and amused by his willingness to spoil the illusions. They took afternoon walks along the creek that gave the town its name, and Maxwell taught her to skip stones across the water. He called at her shop, ostensibly to have a button replaced on his vest, but lingered for hours, helping her organize ribbons and feathers while telling her stories of the places he'd seen in his travels. And each time they were seen together, the whispers in town grew louder. "I heard he's just using her to establish some respectability so he can open his own gambling hall," said Mrs. Peterson to her circle of friends at the Tuesday sewing circle. "Poor Zadie," clucked Mrs. Wilkins. "She's so naive. That man will break her heart and ruin her reputation in one fell swoop." "Someone ought to warn her about his type," agreed Mrs. Bailey, the sheriff's wife. "No good can come from associating with a known cardsharp." But Zadie paid little attention to the gossip. For the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she felt truly alive. Maxwell challenged her thinking, made her laugh, and treated her not as a spinster milliner to be pitied but as a woman of intelligence and worth. One evening in late August, they sat on her porch swing as the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Maxwell had brought a book of poetry, and he read to her in his deep, resonant voice as the shadows lengthened. "You ever think of settling down?" Zadie asked during a pause between poems. Finding one place to stay instead of drifting from town to town. Maxwell was quiet for a moment, his fingers idly playing with the corner of the book's page. "I've thought about it more in the past month than in all the years before," he admitted softly. Their eyes met, and Zadie felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Maxwell leaned toward her slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she found herself responding with a fervor that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, Maxwell's eyes were dark with emotion. "Zadie," he whispered, the first time he'd used her given name, "you should know that I'm not the man they say I am." "I know," she replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You're better." The moment was shattered by the sound of someone clearing their throat loudly. They looked up to see Sheriff Bailey standing at the bottom of the porch steps, his expression grim. "Evening, Miss Thomas," he said, nodding to her before turning his attention to Maxwell. "Stone, I need a word with you." Maxwell stood, his posture tense. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "There's been a complaint filed against you. Harrington says you cheated him out of $500 in last night's game at the Golden Nugget." Zadie rose to stand beside Maxwell. "That's ridiculous. Mr. Stone wasn't even at the saloon last night. He was here, having dinner with me." Sheriff Bailey's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Is that so? Well, Miss Thomas, I'm afraid Mr. Harrington has two witnesses who say otherwise." "Then they're lying," Zadie insisted. Maxwell put a calming hand on her arm. "It's all right, Zadie." He turned to the sheriff. "What exactly am I being accused of?" "Harrington says you used marked cards. Says he noticed when he picked up a discarded deck after you left." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "He's pressing charges, Stone, fraud and theft. Judge Wilson will be here next week for circuit court." Zadie felt the blood drain from her face. Accusations were one thing, formal charges were quite another. "This is absurd. Why would anyone believe Mr. Harrington over Mr. Stone?" Sheriff Bailey gave her a pitying look. "Miss Thomas, you might want to be careful about who you choose to defend." "Stone's reputation speaks for itself." "His reputation is based on rumors and jealousy," Zadie retorted. "Has anyone ever actually proven that he cheats?" "There's always a first time," the sheriff replied. He turned back to Maxwell. "I'm not arresting you now, Stone, but don't leave town. Judge Wilson will sort this out." After the sheriff left, Zadie turned to Maxwell, her hands trembling slightly. "This is serious, isn't it?" Maxwell's expression was grim. "Judge Wilson has a reputation for being harsh with gamblers. If Harrington has witnesses willing to lie for him—" He didn't finish the thought. But why would he do this? Why now? Maxwell ran a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration. "Harrington has been trying to buy the vacant lot next to the Golden Nugget. He wants to expand his cattle business into shipping and build a warehouse. But the owner won't sell." Zadie's eyes widened in understanding. "And the owner is—" "Me," Maxwell confirmed. "I bought it 6 months ago as an investment. Harrington's offered me half what it's worth and I refused." "So this is about property, not cards," Zadie said. "In my experience, it's rarely about the cards themselves." Maxwell took her hands in his. "Zadie, I need you to know something. I was playing cards last night, but not with Harrington. I was in a private game at the back room of the barber shop with some travelers passing through. We played for maybe an hour before I came to see you." Zadie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "So you lied to the sheriff just now, by letting him believe you were with me all evening." Maxwell's expression was pained. "I didn't confirm or deny it. You spoke before I could answer." "But you didn't correct me." She pulled her hands away. "Maxwell, if you're innocent of cheating, why not just tell the truth? Say where you really were, find the travelers to vouch for you. Because they left town this morning, and without them, it's my word against Harrington's and his two so-called witnesses." Maxwell's voice was tight. "Zadie, you have to understand how this works. In these situations, the man with the most influence wins, not the man telling the truth." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "So instead you'd let me perjure myself, let me lie for you in court. No, I would never ask you to do that." He reached for her, but she moved further away. "Zadie, please, I've never lied to you, not once." "Except by omission," she said quietly. "You let me believe you spent the whole evening here when you were actually gambling." Maxwell's shoulders sagged. "I didn't think it mattered. It was just a friendly game, no stakes to speak of. Just a way to pass an hour with some interesting strangers before seeing you." Zadie was silent for a long moment, trying to sort through her jumbled thoughts and emotions. Finally, she said, "I need some time to think, Maxwell. Please go." The pain in his eyes nearly broke her resolve, but she held firm. With a nod of resignation, he picked up his hat and left without another word. That night, Zadie lay awake for hours, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Maxwell Stone, searching for deception. Had she been a fool to believe him when he said he didn't cheat? Was he simply using her, as the town gossips suggested? Or was he genuinely being framed by a powerful man who wanted his property? By morning, she had made up her mind. Whatever Maxwell Stone's flaws, whatever secrets he might be keeping, she didn't believe for a moment that he was the hardened cheat that Harrington and others painted him to be. And she wasn't going to abandon him to face these false charges alone. She found him at the hotel restaurant, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a barely touched plate of eggs. His face lit up when he saw her, then quickly sobered as he remembered how they'd parted. "May I join you?" she asked. He stood quickly to pull out a chair for her. "Of course." Once she was seated, Zadie got straight to the point. "I believe you didn't cheat Mr. Harrington, Maxwell, but we need to find a way to prove it." Relief washed over his features. "Zadie, I'm not finished," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I need you to promise me something. No more secrets, no more omissions. If we're going to face this together, I need to know everything." Maxwell reached across the table to take her hand. "I promise. No more secrets." He hesitated, then added, "There's something I should tell you. The real reason I came to Redemption Creek in the first place." Zadie steeled herself. "Go on." "I came looking for someone, a man named Jedediah Turner." The name sent a shock through her. "My aunt's husband, but he's been dead for 10 years. Maxwell nodded. "That's what everyone believes. But 6 months ago, I met a man in Denver who swore he'd seen Turner alive and well in Nevada, running a mining supply store under a different name." Zadie's mind reeled. "Why would you be looking for him?" "Because 15 years ago, Jedediah Turner and my father were business partners in a mining venture. When the mine struck gold, Turner disappeared with all the profits, leaving my father destitute. The stress and shame hastened his illness." Maxwell's eyes darkened with old pain. "My father died believing he'd failed his family. And you've been tracking Turner all this time." Zadie could hardly process what she was hearing. "Not actively. But when I heard he might be alive, I decided to come to Redemption Creek to learn what I could about his disappearance. Your Aunt Martha was the last person to see him alive or supposedly alive." Zadie sat back, stunned. "My aunt never spoke of him except to say he died in a mining accident. I was still living with family friends in St. Louis then, before she sent for me." Maxwell squeezed her hand. "I didn't know you were Martha's niece when I first arrived in town. By the time I found out, I had already begun to care for you. I couldn't find a way to tell you without seeming like I'd approached you with ulterior motives. And had you approached me because of my connection to Aunt Martha?" "No," he said firmly. Our first meeting was genuinely by chance, and everything that's happened between us since then has been real, Zadie. I swear it." She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but saw only earnestness and a vulnerability she'd never noticed before. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because if Harrington succeeds in having me convicted of fraud, I'll likely face prison time. And I couldn't bear the thought of leaving with you still believing I might have lied to you or used you." His voice grew softer. "You're the first person in years who's seen me as more than just a card sharp, Zadie. You've made me want to be the man you believe I am." Zadie's heart swelled despite the circumstances. "Then let's make sure Harrington doesn't succeed. We have a week until the judge arrives. We need to find evidence that proves your innocence." Maxwell smiled, a new determination in his eyes. "Where do we start?" Zadie thought for a moment. "The marked cards. If Harrington is framing you, those cards must have been marked by someone else. We need to examine them. The sheriff will have them locked up as evidence." A gleam appeared in Zadie's eye. "Then it's fortunate that Mrs. Bailey is one of my best customers. I've been working on a hat for her all week. I think it's time I delivered it personally." Later that day, Zadie knocked on the door of the sheriff's house, a hat box tied with ribbon in her hands. Mrs. Bailey, a plump woman with a fondness for elaborate hats that didn't quite suit her round face, welcomed her warmly. "Miss Thomas, what a pleasant surprise. Is that my new hat?" "It is indeed, Mrs. Bailey. I've added those peacock feathers you admired, and I think you'll be very pleased with the result." Zadie stepped inside, taking note of the sheriff's desk visible through an open door to what appeared to be a small home office. "Is the sheriff at home? I wouldn't want to disturb him." "Oh, he's out making his rounds. Won't be back for hours yet." Mrs. Bailey led Zadie to the parlor. "Now, let me see this creation of yours." For the next half hour, Zadie kept Mrs. Bailey occupied with the hat, suggesting different ways to position it and discussing what dress might best complement it. All the while, she was acutely aware of the office just down the hall. "Mrs. Bailey, might I trouble you for a glass of water? This summer heat is quite oppressive." "Of course, dear. I'll fetch it from the kitchen." Mrs. Bailey bustled off, leaving Zadie alone. Moving quickly, Zadie slipped into the sheriff's office. On his desk sat a small evidence box labeled Harrington vs. Stone. Heart pounding, she opened it to find a deck of playing cards. She quickly examined several, and her milliner's trained eye immediately noticed something odd. The marks on the backs of the cards, tiny indentations near the ornate pattern's edge, were clearly made by a very fine awl or needle. Zadie had seen Maxwell's hands up close many times. His long, elegant fingers bore calluses from shuffling cards, but not the thick, hardened skin one would expect from someone who regularly worked with sharp instruments. A card sharp who marked decks would have distinctive wear patterns on their hands from the tools of their deceptive trade. But she knew someone in town who did have such marks: Harold Jenkins, the saddle maker who doubled as the town's only leather worker, and who also happened to be deeply indebted to Harrington for a loan that had saved his shop last winter. The sound of Mrs. Bailey's returning footsteps sent Zadie hurrying back to the parlor, her mind racing with this new information. She accepted the water with a smile that betrayed none of her internal excitement. "Mrs. Bailey, I was wondering if you've heard anything more about these dreadful charges against Mr. Stone." Mrs. Bailey's eyes lit up at the opportunity for gossip. "Well, I probably shouldn't say, what with Jacob being the sheriff and all, but between us." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Mr. Harrington brought in those cards himself, said he'd found them after Mr. Stone left the saloon. And those two witnesses, both work for Harrington's cattle operation. Convenient, isn't it?" "Very convenient indeed," Zadie agreed, her suspicions growing stronger. "And the judge arriving next week, he's a fair man." Mrs. Bailey waved a dismissive hand. "Judge Wilson, fair enough, I suppose, though he and Mr. Harrington go way back, were partners in a mining venture years ago before Harrington moved into cattle." Zadie nearly dropped her glass. Mining ventures seemed to be at the center of too many connections in this case. Could there be a link between Harrington, Judge Wilson, and the long-missing Jedediah Turner, thanking Mrs. Bailey and refusing payment for the hat? "A gift for your kindness, Mrs. Bailey." Zadie hurried back to the millinery shop where she'd arranged to meet Maxwell. She found him pacing anxiously. "The cards are definitely marked," she told him without preamble. "But not by you. I think Harold Jenkins did it, probably on Harrington's orders, and there's more. Judge Wilson and Harrington were once mining partners." Maxwell's eyes widened. "Just like Turner and my father." "Exactly. Maxwell, I don't think this is just about your property anymore. I think this might connect to Jedediah Turner's disappearance somehow." He ran a hand through his hair. "But how? And why frame me for cheating? To discredit you," Zadie said slowly, working it out as she spoke. "If you're convicted as a fraud, no one will believe anything you might discover about Turner or Harrington." Maxwell nodded, his expression grim. "We need to talk to Jenkins. He's the weak link in all this." "Not yet," Zadie cautioned. "We need more information first." She thought for a moment. "The land records. If Turner, Harrington, and Judge Wilson were all involved in mining ventures, there should be documentation." The next day found them at the county clerk's office, a small, dusty room in the back of the town hall. The elderly clerk, Mr. Perkins, regarded them with suspicion. "Land records are public information, ain't they, Mr. Perkins?" Maxwell asked with a disarming smile. "Suppose they are," the old man grumbled. "What you looking for?" "Mining claims from about 15 years ago," Zadie said. "Particularly anything involving Jedediah Turner, Harrington, or Judge Wilson." Perkins' roomy eyes narrowed. "Turner? Ain't heard that name in years. Died in a mine collapse, if I recall." "That's what we heard too," Maxwell said smoothly. "Just trying to verify some old family business." Eventually, Perkins led them to a cabinet filled with leather-bound record books. "Mining claims would be in these 3 volumes. Don't mess up my system." For hours, they pored over the faded entries, their excitement growing as connections began to emerge. Turner, Harrington, and Wilson had indeed been partners in several mining ventures, along with Maxwell's father, Arthur Stone. But the most interesting discovery came in an entry dated just 2 weeks before Turner's supposed death. "Look at this," Zadie whispered, pointing to a notation. "Turner transferred his share of the Blue Sky mine to Harrington for $1 and other considerations. The same mine that supposedly collapsed and killed him 2 weeks later." Maxwell frowned. "That's highly suspicious. Why would he sell his share right before a major accident?" "Unless he knew the accident was coming," Zadie suggested, "or unless there was no accident at all." They continued searching and found something even more damning, a claim filed by Harrington and Wilson 6 months after Turner's death for a new mine called the Phoenix, located on land that had previously been owned jointly by all 4 partners. "The Phoenix," Maxwell muttered. "Rising from the ashes. Pretty symbolic name for a mine that made them rich after my father was gone and Turner supposedly dead." Zadie squeezed his hand. "Maxwell, I think Turner might have faked his death with Harrington and Wilson's help. They cut your father out, then staged the accident to eliminate Turner from the picture so they could claim the new strike themselves. And if Turner is still alive somewhere, he could expose their scheme." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Which explains why they're so desperate to discredit me before I can find him." Armed with this new information, They decided it was time to confront Harold Jenkins. They found him at his saddle shop, working alone on a bridle, his gnarled fingers manipulating the leather with practiced ease. When he saw them enter, his eyes darted nervously to the door. "Miss Thomas, Mr. Stone, what can I do for you?" Maxwell closed the door behind them and flipped the sign to closed. "We need to talk, Harold," he said calmly, "about the deck of cards you marked for Harrington." The color drained from Jenkins' face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Zadie stepped forward. "Your work is quite distinctive, Mr. Jenkins. Those tiny marks could only have been made by someone with your skill and tools." And Maxwell added, by someone who owed Harrington a significant favor or was paying off a debt. Jenkins' shoulders slumped in defeat. "He'll ruin me if I talk. He'll ruin me if you don't," Maxwell countered. "And I think you know Harrington is involved in something far worse than framing a cardsharp." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. "I just marked the cards like he asked. Said it was a joke he was playing on a friend. I needed the money. My wife's medicine is expensive." Zadie's voice softened. "Mr. Jenkins, we believe Harrington may be involved in fraud, possibly even murder. The judge arriving next week is his partner in crime." "I can't testify against him," Jenkins whispered. "He'd kill me." "You won't have to," Maxwell assured him. "Not if we can find concrete evidence linking Harrington to Turner's disappearance." Jenkins' head snapped up. "Turner, Jebediah Turner," he laughed bitterly. "Is that what this is about? You're digging into ancient history?" Maxwell and Zadie exchanged a look. "You knew Turner?" Zadie asked. "Knew him. I made his saddles, same as I made one for Harrington last month." Jenkins' eyes widened as he realized what he'd just admitted. "Oh God, last month," Maxwell pressed. "You saw Jebediah Turner last month." Jenkins seemed to age 10 years in an instant. "Not Turner. Least he doesn't use that name anymore. Calls himself Smith now. James Smith. Came through town for a day, ordered a custom saddle, paid half up front, said he'd be back for it once his business with Harrington was concluded." "And did Harrington know he was here?" Zadie asked. Jenkins nodded miserably. "They met at the hotel, private dinner. Next day Smith was gone and Harrington was in a foul mood. Week after that he came to me about marking those cards. The pieces were falling into place." If Turner, now Smith, had returned to blackmail his former partners, it would explain Harrington's sudden desperation to discredit Maxwell, who was not only refusing to sell valuable property, but also actively investigating the very secret Harrington needed to protect. "We need to find Smith," Maxwell said. "Did he say where he was staying?" Jenkins shook his head. "Mentioned something about heading to Dry Gulch to see an old friend. That's all I know, I swear." Dry Gulch was a small settlement about 40 miles west of Redemption Creek, barely more than a trading post and a handful of homesteads. If Turner was there, they might have a chance to find him before Judge Wilson arrived. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," Maxwell said. "We'll keep your name out of this." As they left the saddle shop, Zadie turned to Maxwell with determination in her eyes. "We need to go to Dry Gulch. It's dangerous, Zadie. If Harrington realizes we're onto him, he'll come after you whether we go or stay," she interrupted. "Our only chance is to find Turner and convince him to come forward with the truth." Maxwell looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You understand that associating yourself with me in this could ruin your reputation permanently. Even if we succeed, people will talk." Zadie smiled and took his hand. "Let them talk. Some things are more important than gossip." They made their preparations quickly and quietly. Maxwell arranged for 2 horses from the livery stable, claiming they were taking a day trip to visit a potential supplier for Zadie's shop. They packed lightly a change of clothes each, some food, and the documents they'd copied from the county records. They set out at dawn the next morning, hoping to reach Dry Gulch by nightfall. The journey took them through rugged country rocky hills giving way to stretches of dusty plain, with the occasional creek offering welcome relief for both riders and horses. As they rode, Zadie found herself studying Maxwell's profile against the vast Montana sky. In the few short months she'd known him, he'd upended everything she thought she understood about her life. She'd come to Redemption Creek seeking a quiet existence, a respectable business, a place to belong. Instead, she'd found adventure, danger, and a man who made her heart race with a single glance. "What are you thinking about?" Maxwell asked, catching her gaze. "How different my life is from what I expected," she admitted. 3 months ago, I was measuring ladies' heads for bonnets and listening to gossip about people I barely knew. Now I'm racing across the territory to find a man who faked his own death, with a notorious cardsharp as my companion." Maxwell chuckled. "Having second thoughts?" "Not one," she said firmly. "Though I do wonder what will happen after all this is over, assuming we succeed." His expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that too." He guided his horse closer to hers. "Zadie, I've spent most of my life drifting from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. But since meeting you—" He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "I find myself wanting to put down roots." Her heart skipped a beat. "In Redemption Creek." "Wherever you are," he said simply. "If you'll have me." Before she could respond, a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dust just inches from her horse's hooves. The animal reared in panic, nearly throwing Zadie to the ground. "Ride!" Maxwell shouted, spurring his horse forward and reaching to grab the reins of Zadie's mount. Into those rocks. They galloped toward a jumble of boulders about 100 yards away, bullets whistling past them. Reaching the relative safety of the rocks, they dismounted and tethered the frightened horses. "Are you hurt?" Maxwell asked urgently, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. "No, I'm fine." Zadie's voice shook slightly, but her eyes were clear. "Who's shooting at us?" "Harrington must have figured out we're onto him, probably hired guns." Maxwell peered cautiously around a boulder. "I count 2 riders coming this way." "What do we do?" Maxwell drew a Remington revolver from his saddle bag. "I'll hold them off. You need to get to Dry Gulch and find Turner." Zadie shook her head vehemently. "I'm not leaving you here, Zadie, please. This is my fight, not yours." "It became my fight the moment I fell in love with you," she said fiercely. Maxwell stared at her for a heartbeat, then pulled her into a passionate kiss. "And I love you," he whispered against her lips, "which is why I need you safe." Another bullet ricocheted off the rocks above them, sending stone fragments flying. "We're pinned down," Maxwell muttered. "They're trying to keep us here until reinforcements arrive." Zadie looked around desperately, then spotted a narrow ravine leading away from their position. "There, we could follow that gully, stay out of sight." Maxwell nodded. "Good thinking. Let's go." Abandoning their horses, they crept along the ravine, keeping low to avoid being spotted. The gully eventually widened into a dry creek bed that offered a route toward Dry Gulch, though it would mean traveling on foot for many miles. They walked through the heat of the day, rationing their water and keeping a constant watch for pursuers. By late afternoon, exhaustion was taking its toll, and they took shelter in the shadow of an overhanging cliff. "We need to rest," Maxwell insisted, seeing how Zadie's steps had begun to falter. "Just for an hour." They sat close together, sharing the last of their water. Zadie leaned her head against Maxwell's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Tell me more about what happens after," she said softly. "After we find Turner, after we clear your name." Maxwell's arm tightened around her. "I was thinking of opening a legitimate business. Maybe a hotel or a restaurant, something respectable." He paused. "And then, if you were willing, I thought perhaps we might consider marriage." Zadie lifted her head to look at him. "Maxwell Stone, are you proposing to me while we're being chased by gunmen in the middle of nowhere?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I suppose I am, though I had planned something a bit more romantic." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes to the poorly timed proposal, or yes, you'll wait for a better one. Yes to marrying you, you impossible man." She kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the gesture. When they broke apart, Maxwell's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Then I definitely need to get us out of this alive." They resumed their journey as the sun began its descent, the landscape bathed in golden light. By nightfall, they could see the distant lights of Dry Gulch. "We made it," Zadie breathed in relief. "Not quite yet," Maxwell cautioned. "We still need to find Turner and convince him to help us." They approached the settlement cautiously, aware that Harrington's men might have arrived ahead of them. Dry Gulch consisted of little more than a general store that doubled as a post office, a small saloon, and a handful of cabins scattered along its single dirt street. The saloon seemed the logical place to start their search. Maxwell paused outside, turning to Zadie. "Wait here. A lady in a place like this will attract attention we don't need." "A lady covered in dust with a torn dress is hardly going to maintain appearances anyway," Zadie retorted. "Besides, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Recognizing the determination in her voice, Maxwell nodded. "Stay close to me." The interior of the saloon was dim and smoky, occupied by a handful of rough-looking men playing cards or drinking alone. Conversation stuttered to a halt as Maxwell and Zadie entered, all eyes turning to assess the newcomers. The bartender, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, regarded them suspiciously. "Don't get many ladies in here. What can I do for you folks?" "We're looking for a man," Maxwell said, approaching the bar. "Goes by James Smith. Older gentleman, might have come through here recently." The bartender's expression remained impassive. "Lot of Smiths in the world, can't say I recall any particular one." Maxwell placed a gold coin on the counter. "Perhaps this might refresh your memory." The coin disappeared with remarkable speed. "Now that you mention it, there was a James Smith stayed in the room upstairs for a few days. Left yesterday morning, headed north toward the Canadian border, I reckon." Zadie's heart sank. "Yesterday, we missed him by a day. Did he say anything about where exactly he was going?" Maxwell pressed. "It's important we find him." The bartender shrugged. "Not to me, though he did spend most of his time here talking with old Pete over there." He nodded toward an elderly man dozing in the corner. Maxwell and Zadie made their way to the old man's table. Up close, he looked even more ancient, his leathery face a map of wrinkles, his white beard yellowed with tobacco stains. "Excuse me, Mr. Pete," Zadie said gently. "We'd like to ask you about James Smith." One roomy eye cracked open. "Who wants to know? My name is Maxwell Stone. Arthur Stone was my father." Both eyes opened fully at that. "Arthur Stone's boy. Well, I'll be damned." He gestured for them to sit. "Jim said someone might come looking for him. Didn't think it'd be Stone's son with a pretty lady in tow." "Then he was expecting us?" Maxwell asked. Pete cackled. "Not you specifically. Said Harrington was getting nervous, might send someone after him." He studied Maxwell's face. "You got your daddy's eyes. Good man, your father. Didn't deserve what happened to him. You knew my father. Worked his mine for 2 seasons before Turner and the others forced him out." Pete spat on the floor. "Dirty business, that was. Your daddy was the only honest one in the bunch." Zadie leaned forward. "Mr. Pete, we need to find Mr. Smith. Harrington has accused Maxwell of cheating at cards, and the judge coming to try the case is Wilson Harrington's old partner." Pete's eyes widened. "Wilson's coming to Redemption Creek. No wonder Jim lit out of here like his tail was on fire. "Please," Maxwell urged. "We need to find him before Wilson arrives. He's the only one who can expose what really happened." The old man considered them for a long moment, then nodded. "Jim's got a cabin up in the hills about 10 miles north of here. Uses it as a hideout when things get too hot. Said he was heading there to lie low for a while." He pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket and sketched a rough map. "Follow this creek, then look for 3 tall pines growing together. Cabins just beyond them in a small clearing." Maxwell took the map gratefully. "Thank you." "One more thing," Pete added, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Jim's been carrying something with him, papers of some kind. Says they are his insurance policy against Harrington and Wilson. Whatever you do, don't let those papers out of your sight if he gives them to you." Armed with this new information, Maxwell and Zadie secured fresh horses from the local stable and supplies from the general store. They set out at first light, following Pete's crude map into the hills north of Dry Gulch. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed, the path narrowing to a game trail that wound through dense pines. By midday, they reached a swift-flowing creek that matched Pete's description. "We follow this upstream," Maxwell said, consulting the map. "The 3 pines should be about 2 miles ahead." They rode in silence, both lost in thought about what they might discover at Turner's hideout. Would he help them? Or had they come all this way only to find another dead end? "There," Zadie pointed suddenly. 3 pines growing together." Sure enough, 3 tall ponderosa pines stood clustered together on a rise beside the creek, their massive trunks forming a natural landmark visible for some distance. They dismounted and led their horses the rest of the way on foot, approaching cautiously. As Pete had described, a small cabin sat in a clearing just beyond the pines, smoke curling from its chimney. "Someone's home," Maxwell murmured. They tethered their horses to a tree at the edge of the clearing and approached the cabin slowly. Before they could reach the door, it swung open to reveal a man holding a shotgun pointed directly at them. "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." He was older than Maxwell had expected, perhaps 60, with a full white beard and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Despite the years and the changed appearance, there was something in his stance that confirmed this was indeed Jebediah Turner. "Mr. Turner," Maxwell said, keeping his hands visible. "Or do you prefer Smith now? My name is Maxwell Stone. Arthur Stone was my father." The shotgun lowered slightly. "Arthur's boy," his eyes narrowed. "Prove it." Maxwell slowly removed his father's pocket watch from his vest. "My father always said this watch was the only thing Turner couldn't take from him." Turner or Smith studied the watch, then gave a short nod. "Arthur was fond of that timepiece. Said it reminded him that time eventually reveals all truths." He lowered the shotgun completely. "You'd better come inside, both of you." The interior of the cabin was spartanly furnished but clean. A fire crackled in the small stone fireplace, and papers were spread across a rough-hewn table. "This is Zadie Thomas," Maxwell introduced. "She's been helping me uncover the truth about what happened to my father and your disappearance." Turner gestured for them to sit on a bench by the table. "So Arthur's son grew up to be a detective, a cardsharp, actually," Maxwell admitted. "At least until recently." A bark of laughter escaped Turner. "The irony! Arthur hated gambling, said it was a tax on people who didn't understand mathematics." "He taught me to understand the mathematics," Maxwell replied, "which is why I rarely lose." Turner's expression sobered. "Why are you tracking me down after all these years? Your father's been gone a long time." Zadie spoke up. "Harrington has accused Maxwell of cheating at cards. The circuit judge arriving to hear the case is Wilson, your old partner." "Wilson?" Turner's face darkened. "That snake. Still working with Harrington after all this time. We believe they're trying to discredit Maxwell because he's been asking questions about you and the mining ventures you were all involved in, Zadie continued. Questions that might expose what really happened 15 years ago. Turner was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily. I've been running for 15 years, changed my name, moved constantly, looking over my shoulder, all because I made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. He looked directly at Maxwell. Your father wasn't one of them. Arthur Stone was a good man who got caught in something ugly. What really happened? Maxwell asked, the question he'd been waiting 15 years to have answered. Turner stood and moved to the table, gathering some of the papers there. We had 4 mining claims, all fairly productive but nothing spectacular. Then, Arthur discovered geological evidence suggesting a major gold deposit on land adjacent to our smallest mine. He wanted to file a new claim, expand legally. He shook his head. Harrington and Wilson had other ideas. They wanted to forge documents, claim the land had been part of our original stake all along. And my father refused, vehemently, said he'd rather lose the gold than his integrity. Turner's voice softened. Wilson and Harrington decided they didn't need his permission or mine. They forged both our signatures on documents backdating our claim. When your father threatened to expose them, they arranged an accident at the mine, a support beam that mysteriously gave way while he was inspecting the lower tunnel. Zadie gasped. They tried to kill him. They meant to, Turner confirmed grimly. But Arthur survived, though badly injured. His lungs were damaged by the collapse. That's what eventually killed him. And you? Maxwell asked, his voice tight with emotion. Where were you when this happened? I was supposed to be in that tunnel too. But I'd gotten wind of their plan and stayed away. When I confronted them, they offered me a choice: take money to disappear and keep quiet, or join Arthur in another accident. Shame crossed Turner's weathered face. I took the money, let them tell everyone I died in a mine collapse, then ran. Not my proudest moment. But you kept evidence, Zadie observed, nodding toward the papers. Insurance, Turner agreed. Documents proving the fraud, the forged signatures, even letters between Wilson and Harrington discussing how to handle Arthur and me. He gathered the papers into a stack and handed them to Maxwell. I've been carrying these for 15 years, too much of a coward to use them. Maybe you'll be braver than I was. Maxwell took the papers reverently. This is what we need to clear my name and expose them both. If you can get back to Redemption Creek in time, Turner cautioned. When is Wilson due to arrive? In 3 days, Zadie said, and Harrington knows you're looking for me. Turner frowned. The trail back to town won't be safe. His men will be watching for you. We don't have a choice, Maxwell said. We have to try. Turner was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. There's another way. An old mining trail that cuts through the mountains. It's rough going, but it'll bring you to within 5 miles of Redemption Creek from the north. Harrington's men won't be watching that approach. He sketched another map, this one more detailed than Pete's. Follow this route. You can make it in 2 days if you push hard. Maxwell studied the map. Thank you. Will you come with us? Your testimony would make these documents even more powerful. Turner shook his head. I'm not ready to stop running just yet, but use those papers however you need to. It's past time Harrington and Wilson faced consequences for what they did. As they prepared to leave, Turner pulled Maxwell aside. Your father would be proud of the man you've become, not because you're setting this right, but because you found something worth fighting for. He glanced meaningfully at Zadie. Don't let her go, son. Women like that are rarer than gold strikes. They set out immediately, following Turner's map along a nearly invisible trail that wound through dense forest and rocky passes. The going was slow and treacherous, but they pushed on, stopping only when darkness made further progress impossible. That night, camped in the shelter of an overhanging rock, Maxwell held Zadie close as they shared their single blanket. "Are you still planning to marry a notorious cardsharp?" he asked, his voice light though his eyes were serious. "I'm planning to marry Maxwell Stone, businessman and man of integrity," she replied, tracing his jaw with her fingertips. "Though I do hope you'll still teach me a few card tricks. They might come in handy." He laughed and kissed her, marveling at how this remarkable woman had changed his life in just a few short months. They reached Redemption Creek on the afternoon of the second day, entering town from the north, as Turner had suggested. The streets were busier than usual. Judge Wilson had arrived a day early, and his circuit court was set to begin the following morning. They went directly to Sheriff Bailey's office, finding him at his desk reviewing papers. "Stone," he said with surprise. "Miss Thomas. Folks been wondering where you two disappeared to." "We've been gathering evidence, Sheriff," Maxwell said, placing Turner's documents on the desk. "Evidence that proves I didn't cheat at cards and exposes a conspiracy involving Harrington and Judge Wilson." Bailey's eyebrows shot up. "That's a mighty serious accusation." "Read the papers," Zadie urged. "They contain proof of fraud, forgery, and possibly even murder." The sheriff reluctantly began examining the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read. "These appear authentic," he admitted finally. "But Judge Wilson is staying at Harrington's ranch. Even if I wanted to act on this, I'd need to bring these accusations before the judge himself." "That's exactly what we want you to do," Maxwell said. "In open court tomorrow, where everyone can hear the truth." Bailey looked uncertain. "Stone, you're asking me to publicly accuse one of the most respected judges in the territory and the wealthiest man in the county of serious crimes, based on papers provided by a man accused of cheating at cards. And a respectable business owner," Zadie added firmly. "I'm willing to stake my reputation on the truth of these documents, Sheriff Bailey." The sheriff studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll present these to the judge tomorrow when he calls your case, but I can't promise he'll even look at them." "That's all we ask," Maxwell said. "Just the chance to present the evidence." Word spread quickly through Redemption Creek that the cardsharp and the milliner had returned with some kind of evidence that might turn the tables on Harrington. By morning, it seemed the entire town had crowded into the makeshift courtroom set up in the town hall. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and cold eyes, called the court to order precisely at 9 o'clock. He peered down at Maxwell over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Maxwell Stone, you stand accused of fraud and theft through the use of marked cards. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Maxwell replied clearly. "And I request that Sheriff Bailey be permitted to present evidence relevant to this case." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Sheriff." "What evidence is this?" Bailey stepped forward, Turner's documents in hand. "Your Honor, I've received information that suggests this case may be part of a larger conspiracy. These papers appear to indicate objection." Harrington's lawyer jumped to his feet. "These alleged documents have nothing to do with the charges at hand." "On the contrary," Maxwell said, rising. "These documents prove that Mr. Harrington and Your Honor have conspired in the past to commit fraud and possibly worse crimes. They establish a clear motive for Mr. Harrington to frame me for cheating." A murmur ran through the crowded room. Judge Wilson's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. I will not permit such slanderous accusations in my courtroom." "They're not accusations, they're facts," came a voice from the back of the room. Heads turned as the crowd parted to reveal Jedediah Turner, looking travel-worn but determined. A collective gasp went up from the older residents who recognized him despite the passage of years. "Turner," Judge Wilson whispered, his face now ashen. "You're dead." "Not quite," Turner replied, walking forward, "though you and Harrington certainly tried your best to arrange it." Harrington, who had been sitting in the front row, lurched to his feet. "This is preposterous. This man is an impostor." "I assure you, I'm very real," Turner said evenly. "And so are the documents. Sheriff Bailey is holding documents that prove how you and Wilson forged signatures, committed fraud to steal a gold-rich claim, and arranged an accident that eventually killed Arthur Stone." The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations. Judge Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly, but the noise only increased. "Order! I will have order!" Wilson shouted, but his authority was crumbling by the second. Sheriff Bailey, seeing which way the wind was blowing, stepped forward. "Your Honor, in light of these accusations and the evidence presented, I believe it would be appropriate for you to recuse yourself from this case." "I will do no such thing," Wilson blustered. "Then perhaps I should place you under arrest instead," Bailey said, his hand moving to his gun belt. "The documents I've reviewed contain sufficient evidence to charge both you and Mr. Harrington with multiple crimes." What happened next unfolded with startling speed. Harrington, seeing his carefully constructed world collapsing, drew a hidden derringer and aimed it at Turner. "You should have stayed dead," he snarled. Maxwell reacted instantly, tackling Zadie to the ground as the shot rang out. When he looked up, he saw not Turner but Harold Jenkins lying on the floor, blood spreading across his shirt. The saddle maker had pushed Turner aside, taking the bullet meant for him. In the chaos that followed, Sheriff Bailey and his deputies subdued both Harrington and Judge Wilson. Dr. Morgan hurried to Jenkins' side, but it was clear from his grim expression that the wound was serious. Zadie knelt beside the dying man, taking his hand. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you risk yourself?" Jenkins' breathing was labored, but he managed a faint smile. "Needed to make things right. Been living with the guilt too long." His eyes sought out Maxwell. "I'm sorry about the cards. Shouldn't have helped frame you." "You've more than made up for it," Maxwell assured him. Jenkins gave a slight nod, then his eyes closed for the final time. In the days that followed, the full story emerged. With Turner's testimony and the documentary evidence, both Harrington and Judge Wilson were charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. The case would be tried in the territorial capital by a judge with no connections to either man. Maxwell was fully exonerated of the cheating charges, and as the truth about Harrington and Wilson's crimes spread, many of those who had been quickest to believe the worst of him found themselves shamefaced and apologetic. Harold Jenkins was buried with honors, the entire town turning out for his funeral. His sacrifice had redeemed his earlier mistake in the eyes of the community, and Maxwell ensured that Jenkins' widow would never want for anything. Turner, after giving his formal statement to the authorities, prepared to leave Redemption Creek. "I've been running too long," he told Maxwell and Zadie the night before his departure. "Time I found a place to settle down, live what years I have left in peace." "You're welcome to stay here," Zadie offered. "The town could use a man with your experience." Turner shook his head. "Too many ghosts here for me, but I appreciate the offer." He handed Maxwell a folded paper. "Deed to my share of the Phoenix mine. It should have been your father's all along. Now it's yours." "I can't accept this," Maxwell protested. "You can and you will," Turner insisted. "Consider it payment of a long overdue debt." The morning of Turner's departure coincided with another significant event in Redemption Creek, the opening of Stone's Hotel and Restaurant, built on the property Harrington had so desperately wanted. Maxwell had used his newly acquired mining wealth to create something permanent and respectable, a legacy that would honor his father's memory. As they stood on the boardwalk outside the new establishment, watching Turner's wagon disappear down the street, Zadie slipped her hand into Maxwell's. "Are you happy?" she asked. "With all of this?" Maxwell looked at their entwined fingers, at the simple gold band he'd placed on her finger just the day before in a quiet ceremony attended by those few in town who had always believed in him. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied honestly, "though I do miss the cards sometimes." Zadie smiled mischievously and pulled a deck from her pocket. "I thought you might. Perhaps you could teach your wife a few games, just for entertainment, of course." Maxwell laughed and drew her close. "Mrs. Stone, I believe you're the best hand I've ever drawn." "And you, Mr. Stone, are the only gamble I've ever taken," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. From that day forward, whenever anyone in Redemption Creek or the surrounding territories spoke of Maxwell Stone, the conversation invariably turned to the old scandal. "They said he cheated at cards," someone would begin. And Zadie Stone, respected businesswoman and devoted wife, would smile that mysterious smile of hers and reply, "He never lied to me once." And that, in the end, was the only truth that mattered.